Let's paint today Valentine's Day Rose Heart tutorial with watercolors. Roses are very characteristic to Valentine's Day, but I wanted to make something different. Line drawing is available for download. I'm using a graphite stick. Apply graphite layer to the other side of transparent paper. Put it back on my original paper and transfer with outlining all the lines from the reference. Removing transparent paper, and now with a 0.3 graphite mechanical pencil, I'm going again over each line. Even the tiniest spot marks are also transferred, but very, very lightly. With an elastic eraser, removing the excess amount of graphite off the paper by rolling over the reference. The outline should be very light. For this tutorial, I'm starting new watercolor set, painting out pigment colors, and we are ready to start mixing watercolors. Applying water to my color palette, and first color is Permanent Rose. This rose has a lot of pink spots visible, especially closer to the outer edge of the petals. For the second mix, I'm taking Sennelier Red together with Perylene Maroon, very rich red color tone. Third mix, Sennelier Red. Fourth mix, Perylene Violet together with a little touch of indigo, very, very small amount. And a little bit more of Perylene Violet, and the fifth Perylene Violet with Sennelier Red. More Permanent Rose, and we can start painting. Be sure that your water is clean after mixing watercolors. With round and synthetic brush, I'm applying water to first petal that I will be painting. I will paint petal by petal, starting with Permanent Rose, carefully looking at the reference. Reference is available for download. I always encourage open it right beside your tutorial or on other gadget, or just right beside the tutorial screen, and carefully study each petal that you will be painting. Every petal has slightly different spots, different tonal values, lights and shadow areas. We all need to see all those details and paint them in our painting. Moving to the next petal, leaving the upper part of the petal much lighter. There we see that there's light touching the surface, and that area is much lighter. While the surface is slightly wet, I'm applying a little bit of Sennelier Red and smoothing the applied layer. As I apply watercolors, I instantly go with a clean and dry brush and smooth the applied layer. By clean and dry brush, I mean that I wash it in the water, clean it in paper towel, and smooth the applied layer. Moving forward, upper part of the petal is lighter and more pinkish, and the lower part is much darker and more reddish, which I use Sennelier Red together, Sennelier Red and Perylene Maroon. These two pigments will be most used here for the red area, and Permanent Rose for the pink spots. You can definitely try pigments that you have. Cadmium Red, Windsor Red, Opera Rose, Permanent Rose, any other rose that you have also will do. Moving to the next petal, applying Permanent Rose. Technique is the same all the way through each petal. It just depends where are the spots, where are the shadows. Everything is visible in the reference, and I'm constantly checking reference for any changes, different shadow areas, lighter areas. Loading my brush with a mix of Sennelier red with Perlin maroon and applying to the lower part of this petal. This petal is, I think, the most darkest, as we can see from the reference, but that darkness we will manage by layers, not going straight with very dark and saturated watercolors. We are here to layer many layers to get this vibrant, rich, and full three-dimensional look. If we will go straight with dark watercolors, we will end up with a flat-looking painting. Or also, if you use two saturated watercolor mixes, your painting can look a bit dull, because watercolors is a transparent medium and they need to be layered. If you want to paint very saturated, super rich, then gouache could be a nice way to use that. Acrylics, oils, but watercolors are transparent and we need to work with them transparently, layering and achieving vibrant results by many layers, not with saturation of the watercolor mixes. Moving to the next petal, I applied Permanent Rose, and now carefully, looking at the reference, apply red watercolor mix to the areas that I see in the reference that are red, leaving pink spots unpainted. Careful observation of the reference is the key in realistic watercolor painting. You really need to study the reference in order to make it more real, more natural. The more we look, the more we start to notice, see, compare, and apply what we observed to the painting. This is the first layer. It's very transparent. Nothing is quite even similar to the reference. We're just getting started. It's just the beginning stage where we are placing some lights, some shadows, leaving spots unpainted, and I'm leaving for the spots much wider area than it looks, and also for the light I also leave wider area, so after layers we can still have those spots and light. forward very carefully and accurately, especially as we reached the end of the heart shape or the beginning of the heart shape. And we need to paint here really careful not to go over the edge of the heart. If you know that your hand isn't so steady, you can use here a tape and stick it around the edge line of the heart, and after finishing painting, remove it. I will try to be as neat and accurate as possible, but my hand also sometimes go out of the edge, but I really try to be precise here. Applying red to the areas that we see are more reddish and leaving pink area unpainted. Applying watercolors carefully, we have a heart shape, and also carefully around other petals, especially petal which is lighter. We don't want to overpaint it, leave it light as it is, and carefully adding watercolors to other petal which is darker. with finer tip brush, painting petals that are smaller to be more precise and careful with the edges and other petals, so we are not disturbing other area that we don't need to paint right now. Carefully looking at the reference, one petal is more red in color, other petal is more pink, especially that one. Those petals that are turned to the light source, they are much lighter and more cooler in color tones and more pink in color. And those petals that are on the other side, on the right side, they are darker, warmer and more red in color. But also there are spots in pink, but also spots that are in the shadow area are slightly darker, and those spots that are in the light area are lighter. Not all the spots are completely identical in terms of tonal values. Technique is the same, starting with watery layer, applying permanent rows to the area that we see are more pink. Everything is transparent, nothing too dark, nothing too saturated. Carefully, transparently applying first layer. This is just the first layer. Nothing should be as it is in the reference. With the finer tip brush, painting the middle centerpiece, there are a lot of little petals curling all around themselves and each other, and we need to carefully look at the reference. How are they placed there? Where's the darker area? Where's the lighter? How to separate them? And carefully painting with the very tip of the brush. Color tone is slightly darker, which is Cenelia red together with Pearlin maroon, but still it is transparent. I can see even my very light graphite marks through this layer. We need to paint transparently. This is the key to get a vibrant and beautiful watercolor painting. To make something lighter, we are using water. To make something darker, we are applying another layer of these watercolors. Some of those little petals are more pink, and the inner part, shadow area, is a mix of Cenelia red together with Pearlin maroon. It can be cadmium red mixed with Pearlin maroon. You need to experiment with the pigments you already have in your paint box. You don't need to buy the exact pigments that I have or any other tutor. You just need first explore the pigments that you have. It's very important. The more you will practice mixing watercolors, finding color tones, the more you will start to be good at it, and the more you start to memorize pigment color names. Applying darker layer and smoothing with a clean and dry brush. And still looking at reference constantly. I'm zooming in closer the area that I'm painting, then moving to another area. Now I'm painting each petal separately as an individual subject, and later when I will have more layers applied, I will start to look at this rose as a one piece. But now I'm really studying each petal. Adding Cenelia red to my color palette and painting further. I mix small amount of watercolors. Also suggest for you, don't mix huge amount of watercolor mixes in order to so that you will be enough for the whole painting process, and then I think you finish with a huge amount of leftovers. I really suggest making smaller amount of watercolor mixes. Don't be afraid to run out of the mix. You know the pigments that you pre-mixed in the beginning, you can mix again, and even if it slightly will be different from the first mix, don't worry. Your painting will only benefit if you will have slightly different color tones. It will be more beautiful, more interesting, because pigments are the same. Slightly different color tone is not a problem. Carefully with a finer tip brush, applying smaller petals and checking reference and painting transparently. First layer is done, everything now is dry, and we can move forward. With a finer tip brush, I'm taking Sennelier Red together with Perylene Maroon and apply petal which is the darkest, the most widest, and in front of us. And I'm painting transparently still, applying next layer of watercolors of the same mixes and carefully going where the red parts are, avoiding pink areas, pink spots that we see in the reference. I'm not painting them. Later I will go over with permanent rose, but for now painting the red areas. Taking round synthetic brush for a wider areas of red color. And carefully, as you can see, I'm painting around those spots. After the drying time, those spots became much lighter because paper is absorbing some part of the pigment, and after drying it looks much lighter when we are painting. Still painting each petal separately and applying layers of watercolors. Loading my brush with permanent rose and with round synthetic brush applying watery transparent layer to the spot areas. And we will do that repeated multiple times. It's all about layering to get this fluffy, smooth, velvety look of rose. It's all about layering. Don't be afraid, don't be discouraged when you see that after a few layers your painting doesn't look close to the reference. That's completely normal. I'm mostly painting from the shadow area towards the lighter area. Apply watercolor layer in the darker area, and with a clean dry brush I'm smoothing towards the lighter area. Skipping from one petal to another, I'm building the whole look, not working from one side and finishing on the other side. I'm constantly going from one petal to another, so I'm building gradually the whole rose. And with a clean dry brush, smoothing the layers. Constantly checking reference all the time. It's no matter how long I will paint, I will constantly be looking at the reference. It's all about careful observation and less about technique. The more you will find information in the reference and apply to your painting, the more realistic your painting is going to look. The more we look, the more we start to notice. Loading brush and separating carefully petals one from another, and careful the edge of the heart shape. We want to have it neat and crisp, then the effect will be beautiful. We don't want some fluffy brush strokes going out of the heart shape. In realistic watercolor painting, especially painting single objects or some flower composition on a white paper background, it's very crucial to have neat and clean surrounding area. You can have a very beautifully painted flower or a composition, but little smudges or watercolor drops on the background, it can ruin the whole composition, ruin the whole painting, no matter how beautiful it was painted. And you can have a very simple painting but with a very neat surrounding area, and it will be a win. Carefully painting around lighter petals, separating, applying layers. Technique is the same, approach is the same. It's just continuing to paint what I see in the reference, applying all the darker areas, all the spots. I don't have completely identical spots in my painting. You can definitely do that if you feel that you want to do that. But I got the characteristic look of this rose and have some minor changes. If you are looking for 100% accuracy, of course you can do that. This is your painting. You can change slightly some details unless it really stays in the same characteristics of the subject that you are painting. As more and more layers are applied, we slowly start to notice that this rose is looking more as the reference. Petals start to separate and become more and more visible, more three-dimensional. It's all about layers. It's all about noticing tonal changes. To get a realistic looking subject on a flat surface, we need to see different tonal values. Not just dark and light. There are half tones, reflected light area, cast shadow area. Everything needs to be considered and applied to your painting. Moving gradually, slowly and patiently. If you want to rush things, better pause, go for a break, for a walk, have a cup of tea, come back relaxed and willing to work further, slowly and patiently. Realistic watercolor painting isn't about speed. It's not about fast results. It's more of the process, enjoyment of the process, being in the process. Then you will have good results. If you will be too concentrated on the end result, you will definitely rush some things through and probably will not have the results that you were aiming for. The slower, the better. You can pause the tutorial anytime you want, go back for some minutes, continue. I'm painting for some while. I'm painting almost daily, so I have a little bit maybe faster pace at my painting, but you can paint at your own speed, at your own pace. Pause the video, carefully observe the reference, zoom in closer, zoom out, look at the whole painting, and paint in your own speed. Be careful with this area that I'm painting right now. Take a closer look in the reference, how those petals are separating. This is a tricky area. There are some folds of the petals and not quite straight away visible which is the shadow area of which petal. So carefully paint here with the finest brush, patiently, and careful study the reference. It's all about looking and seeing. Mixing new amount of watercolors, adding Sennelier Red, and for the second mix Sennelier Red together with Perlin Maroon. Applying darker area to the middle petal. More layers are required there, but still we're not achieving the saturation in few layers. It's all about layering. Patiently paint further, trust the process. With a round synthetic brush, applying darker watercolor mix to the petal on the left, starting from the shadow area, carefully around other petals. The surface is dry as I am applying watercolors. Careful also, don't overpaint the spot area. Washing my brush, loading with the Sennelier Red, and smoothing towards the edge line of the heart. And careful with that outline of the heart shape. Painting further. Especially careful and slowly when you are painting around the heart shape, because it's very possible to go out of the edge line. As I mentioned, you can also use a tape. Also a solution, if you really went over the edges, don't stress. You can, for example, take dark gouache paint and paint the background, or you can draw a circle around the heart and apply gold color. That will also be a nice result. I tried my best to be as accurate as possible with the edge line of the heart. I like how it looks on the white background. Painting spots with permanent rose. Take a look and see that those spots that are on the left are darker than those spots that are in the middle of the rose. In the first look, yes, maybe they all look pink and the same, but the more we start to look, we will notice that even spots are slightly different in tonal values. Something is lighter, something is darker. Applying more permanent rose to my color palette and painting further. These spots here are bigger, wider, but take a careful look and you will notice that in the middle of this curved petal, those spot area has slightly lighter, in the middle, lighter area. That's what I'm leaving. I painted on the outer edge and inner part and left the middle part slightly unpainted, smooth out the applied layer. Applying more watercolors to the shadow area, careful around petals. As I'm applying shadow area on some petal, I will instantly correct the lighter petal edge line, so we have a very clean edges. Applying permanent rose and Sennelier red. Also, this curved petal is slightly lighter on the right and slightly darker on the left. Everything is visible in the reference. All the information that we need is in the reference. Don't assume something and apply it. Don't think that maybe there is darkness or no. You need to look. Everything is there. Don't guess. Don't just be carried away with painting and not looking in the reference. If you want to get realistic results, your reference is your guide. applying Sennelier Red to my color palette and painting further, making even darker, more saturated this middle petal, painting around pink spots. The more layers are added, the more rose starts to appear. With each new layer, rose is becoming more realistic and more three-dimensional. Still working on the shadow areas, making them more darker, more saturated. For bigger, wider areas, I'm using round synthetic brush, and for smaller areas, I'm using finer tip brush. More precision on the center part, separating and making more visible those tiny curled petals that we see in the middle of the rose. Don't neglect that area. Keep an eye on the reference and apply what you see to your painting with the very tip of the brush. Don't rush here. It's better to spend extra time on the center part, and the more beautiful your rose will appear. It's all about patience and careful observation of the reference. The more layers I'm putting, the more saturated rose is becoming, and I can now add slightly darker watercolor mixes, more saturated to the shadow area. Most of the tonal values and details are already painted, and we can go with greater contrast to the shadow area, but be careful, don't lose light, don't lose pink area. Adding permanent rose to my color palette, and with round synthetic brush applying permanent rose to the areas which are the spots of the pink color. And as you can see, I'm going over the whole petal area. As I'm going with transparent and watery layer, I can freely go over the whole area because underneath all the details are already in places, tonal values are set, everything is at this point already completely in its places where it should be, and even going over with watery wash of pink color, still everything will be visible, all the tonal values, spots will be in places. I'm just adding a watery wash of permanent rose. Again, as you can see, on the upper petal, I'm going over with permanent rose, very transparent amount. It gives a nice pink glow to the whole surface of the petals and also making those spots more vivid, more pinky. And Sennelier red with Perlin maroon, making some areas more darker, more intense. Also notice the difference. Pink spots that are in the shadow are darker than those pink spots that are towards the light source. It is important to make them different. Don't leave all the pink spots completely the same, completely identical on all petals. Adding darker area to the middle petal, turning around and applying fine layer, fine brush stroke to the other side, separating these petals. We see in the reference that there's the thin darker shadow line, and smoothing towards the shadow. As we are separating rose petals, they are more popping up from the surface. We can't have everything smooth, we need to have some crispness, especially where the petals are meeting, where they're intersection each other. Separating, dividing with the crisper, more finer brush strokes. At this moment you can use the watercolor mix that we had, Perlin Violet together with Indigo, but be very careful, this is super dark and intense watercolor mix. And I'm slightly mixing it together with Sennelier Red and Perlin Maroon mix, applying, separating in that area where is the shadow of each petal, the darker area of the petal, carefully with the very tip of the brush, and be very careful. We'll be repeating this. This watercolor mix is super dark, super intense, and you can easily finish with too dark mark, which will be too contrasty and really jumping out of the whole composition. We still want to be everything in harmony and beautiful. So we have gradual transitions from the very darkest spot to lighter area. Now I'm working more on making petals more vivid and separating one from each other. The more I separate each petal, the more this rose looks fuller and popping up from the paper surface. It's the work of the brush and your patience. Still looking at reference and painting further, layer by layer, brushstroke after brushstroke. I'm building this realistic rose. Adding more Sennelier red together with Perlin maroon to my color palette, and now with quite saturated watercolor mix, I'm adding some in some areas to make more contrast. It's not super saturated, there's still water and still amount of transparency in this watercolor mix, but it is much saturated than we painted previously. Be very careful when you are adding such a layer. It only can be done towards the end, and be sure that you are not painting all petals with this saturated watercolor mist. Don't be carried away and start to apply it everywhere. Just little places where is the darkest areas. We see in the reference, you can squint your eyes and notice where's the darker areas and apply there this very saturated watercolor mix. Be very careful not to overwork one area, because you can also easily with synthetic brush start to lift out the pigment and there can be left a little hole. So be very careful when you are adding this watercolor mix. I'm doing that towards the end to give more contrast to some areas of the composition. Adding more Sennelier red and Perlin maroon, and I'm applying this watercolor mix on the red area, painting around pink spots. And the more you can see I add this saturated watercolor mix, the more pink spots start to be more contrasty and they appear even more vivid. It's the matter of contrast. I'm not doing anything with the pink spot area, I'm just adding more contrast to the red area. Now, as I'm approaching a finishing part of this painting, with the finest tip brush, I start to correct. It also is called cleaning up the painting. I'm correcting some edge lines of the petals, which are more fluffier, not so precise. I'm loading my brush with the colors that I have on my palette, and painting from the shadow area of one petal, correcting edge line of the other. I'm not outlining petal edges. I'm adding more finer brush strokes to the shadow area and correcting the lightest part of the petal, which is right beside the shadow area. So we are not outlining. It's very important to understand this difference. We are separating with the shadow. We are making petal edges crisper with the shadow area of the other petal. It's a very accurate and careful work to get more precision, more accuracy, and the whole beauty of the realistic watercolor painting. Of course, if you are happy with the results, I'm happy with my results, I will stop in a few minutes, but you can always push yourself a little bit further. For an art exhibitions in botanical field, this is just the beginning stage. This rose should have many more hours of work to get a really representative, realistic botanical painting. I'm showing you the approach, the way, and I always you encourage to do more. My limit is time. I can't make tutorials that are 10 hours, 20 hours long, but that's how long can take this size of painting to get it really, really worked through. I really enjoyed this watercolor session of painting Rose Heart. Hope you learned something new, and I think this can be a very beautiful present for a loved one, or you can give it to your very good friend. You can make it as a card or as a painting. I think this is a very nice idea of painting rose slightly different than usual. Thank you for watching. Hope you learned something new, and see you in my next tutorials. Bye bye!